I'm Ted Conover. I'm a journalist and a writer of articles and books. I also teach journalism and writing at New York University's Carter Journalism Institute. I think it is more necessary to explain ourselves as journalists these days. Especially in this country, there is a significant skepticism about the work of journalism and our impartiality, and lots of suspicion about our agendas. And I think the more transparent we can be about our motives and our methods, the better. It's possible in writing just as it's possible in audio or video as well. You know, when the camera moves back to show other cameras or follows the interviewer back to her hotel room where she's organizing her notes or making a preparatory phone call to a source, that's all, I think, part of the story these days. Last fall at New York University, we had an event featuring the crew of the Vice News documentary feature on the March on Charlottesville, Virginia. Every member of the crew was there, and after showing the video, we got to ask questions, but that was a great example of showing on the video all the pressures, say on the female lead, as she's sort of actively being intimidated by guys shouting at her and coming close to her physically, and that becomes an important part of the story. And when I'm writing about working as a meat inspector in a slaughterhouse, I write about how the work is hard for me, how there's lots I don't understand, how I'm not as good at it as I would have been if I had spent more time in that world. And I think it's including those elements makes for a more interesting story and adds transparency at the same time. I think that's also a trend in the culture brought about partly by the internet, is the increased use of the first person and of a more personal voice in journalism, right? As opposed to 10 or 20 years ago when TV anchors spoke in a sort of authoritative we, and newspapers also avoided the first person. It's all becoming more personal, and I think the idea of subjectivity is no longer such a problem for journalists. I think we understand that that's part of most reporting, and that what we should aspire to is fairness. Use of the I can enhance a sense of immediacy, of communication, like the reader's receiving a letter from this person, a letter from somebody familiar to them. If the I is relatable, if it's a person the reader might like, then that helps. I don't want to be the subject of my reporting. Sometimes I'm just a person for other people to talk to. Like, who I am is not that important. Other times, who I am matters a lot. So I think different parts of me matter to different stories. When I'm a prison guard, it's important to say that my wife claims this is bringing out my inner disciplinarian. Okay, I don't think of myself as a policeman, but she says, well, this is bringing out the side of you that acts like that. That's not a compliment, by the way. And but you need to risk putting yourself in an unfavorable light in order to earn the reader's trust, I think. I believe it's impossible to describe someone with total fidelity. I don't think it's possible. I think I could try to write the most flattering portrait of you, and you would still take issue with some detail that I mentioned that I didn't think was important to you, but it was. I could write that you unbutton your top 2 buttons, and as though perhaps that were a sign of informality, and you could take that as as a sign of what? I don't know, that you're louche or something. I don't know, but I find it's impossible to anticipate all the ways somebody might object to my description of them. So I try, I aim for accuracy, and I aim for fairness. I'm always uncomfortable when people say I'm an undercover reporter, because it implies I'm a spy in search of wrongdoing. That if I'm an undercover prison guard, it's because I'm going in to root out the corruption of the other guards. I don't start with that presumption that there's wrongdoing here. I think what I have often wished as a journalist is what every journalist wishes, which is that we could be in that room, right? We could be in that room without everyone knowing we're there. And because when a journalist is there, people talk differently. And you want them to talk the way they would speak if you weren't there. So the goal is less to expose wrongdoing than to gain a true understanding. I think intelligent readers intuitively perceive the ethical problems of doing what I do. So, for example, working in a prison is its own kind of ethical problem. Some people think just doing that is bad. Another example, in my book, The Roots of Man, which is about roads in different parts of the world and what happens on the roads and the power of those roads, I revisited Kenya, where I'd written about truck drivers spreading AIDS, and to a lesser degree, women they slept with and sometimes infected, and vice versa. And so when I went back for this book, I thought, I want to talk to these women on this trip. And there's a moment where they've been telling me how hard their lives are because they're infected, how hard it is, they're rejected by their village, they're often unwell, and I am listening carefully and completely missing the point, which one of them says, well, what do you think? And I said, oh, I feel terrible. No, what should we do? And I said, what do you mean? You should carry on as best you can. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, no, we're still working. So they have kids to support, but they're HIV positive, and if they tell customers that, they won't have work, and their kids won't eat. So what should they do? I should know. I'm an educated Western person. But I had no idea. And I'm still not sure what to say. And I think it behooves me to show where I don't have the answer, and to show where my problems are nothing compared to their problems. I do think part of legitimacy in journalism now is acknowledging your privilege and acknowledging your blind spots and your ignorance. That doesn't mean you're going to do it every page. It just means along the way, you should pay some attention to that as best you can. And if someone's telling you you're missing something, you need to listen. I'm thinking a lot about the reader when I decide on a topic. I want to know, so I often picture my aging mother and think, would she be interested in this? She's not an academic. She's not a tough guy. She's not, would she? And if the answer is yes, then I might stick with it a while. But then when I'm in the middle of it, I stop thinking like that and I try to inhabit the world fully. And maybe after a few days, it's the weekend and I think, okay, what have I got? And what am I missing? Have I only spoken to this kind of person and I should really be meeting that kind of person? Have I only talked to adults and no kids, only men and no women, only nice people and not angry people? I try to think, do I have all the pieces I need to tell a good story? I like to think I've gotten better at this over time, but even now, there's part of the process that I can't control. It's taking shape in my head at night, or when I'm on a walk, I think, oh, that would be a good story. Every storyteller is concerned with an ending. It's unsatisfying to have a story that simply stops. And one satisfying way to end is with a moral, with a lesson. So we can walk away thinking, oh yeah, that makes sense. A lesson to move forward with. Now sometimes I have moments like that. Coyotes, my book about undocumented migration, ends with a story of a guy who appeared only briefly in the book because he got caught and deported. But he then came back and he got caught again. And then he came back again. And it's not immoral exactly, but it's a sort of good idea on which to end, which is that this is a story of persistence and ambition and getting back up when you've been knocked down. And so I do look for things that I think can serve that role. I don't always find them. There's a very good question to be asked about particular narratives and general truths. And a method of journalism is the anecdote that stands for the larger story. And I think one problem with the entire narrative approach is that every narrative simplifies. Some would say oversimplifies, because to tell a good story you have to leave things out. And sometimes the things you leave out are the exceptions to the rule, which are nevertheless interesting. So this is a fundamental issue of narrative work, is that yes, you're presenting this as something that may have a larger meaning, and yet that larger meaning may not have exact correspondence to the larger reality. And I think the best journalism is both specific and general. And if you can see the ways in which this example is not typical, you should say so, right? Or if you see the ways that this doesn't stand for the whole, it's important to mention it. Well, so anthropology and journalism have a lot in common. Both are interested in explaining the world. They share certain methods, including the interview, what we're doing right now. Though in anthropology, those interviews are typically a small part of a large research strategy that involves all kinds of analysis and is done in order to be part of a conversation with other anthropologists above all. In journalism, obviously, our audience is not other journalists. If we're doing a good job, we're writing for people at large. A journalist who could take the time to learn a language or understand customs or move somewhere in order to get the story would really have something great to write about and could broaden journalism and deepen journalism. So I like to think there's a conversation you can have as a journalist with social science. Now, people in Kazakhstan, people in Kuala Lumpur post to Twitter, post to Facebook, tell their own stories and tell them with an immediacy and intimacy that eclipses what most of us educated people in the West could do. But I think that's good. I think there will still be a demand for thoughtful analysis of news and for a sort of long look at what's happening in far-flung places, but that's really changing journalism, is the multiplicity of sources, including untutored ones, just people who can shoot with their Samsung. After my last reported book, The Roots of Man, in the last month, my editor said, "Oh, by the way, do you have any photographs?" And I said, "Actually, yes." And we ended up including, I think, 24 of them. But it could have been many more if I'd been prepared. And so not just for books, but for any piece of writing that can appear on the web, we're all carrying phones now. The ability to take a video, to take still shots, to record sound. This all can add to the power and interest of a story. It can also distract. But I think as a writer, I'm competing now with video. I'm competing with anything on a screen, and a lot of things on a screen move, and they have amazing colors, and they come with sound, and that's my competition, and I would be foolish not to incorporate some of that in the presentation of my story, at least the digital presentation of my story. Whoever's sitting in this chair in 10 or 20 years is less likely to have a paper publisher and more likely to publish on a screen.